Alright, today we're going to be working on the neon again, but this is just normal maintenance that should be done anytime that you replace an engine with a junkyard engine and you don't know all of what's been done to it before you got it. I'm going to be doing the water pump and timing belt because I don't know how old the timing set is. I'm also replacing the timing tensioner idler. You should replace that every time you do the timing belt, and the water pump, well, you're going to be in there anyway. The reason I say to replace the timing tensioner is I've actually had one of these fail on a neon. The timing belt didn't break, but that failed and caused the engine to have problems. Ended up having to replace the cylinder head because of that. I'm also going to be doing the neutral safety switch because that's why the ignition key doesn't start the car. I've actually got it jumpered right now so that it works, but the way these are laid out, this center pin is the neutral, or the park neutral signal to the computer. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be sitting out like this when it's in park, or if it's pushed in, because the outer casing and the center ball can actually move independent of each other. But this gives a ground signal to the ignition switch when it's in park and neutral, and that's what tells the computer it can start. I'm not exactly sure why mine's failed, but I'm replacing it either way because it was only $8. These outer two pins are your reverse signal. When your transmission is in reverse, it allows power from one post to the other, and that turns on your rear view lights and lets the computer know you're in reverse. One of the wires on the pigtail going to the neutral safety switch for the reverse lights is broken. So I'm going to have to try to fix that, otherwise I'm going to have to replace the entire pigtail, which is more expensive than this sensor for some stupid reason. But anyway, that's what's on the agenda today. And yes, I did have to rent a Chrysler Harmonic balancer puller tool. Unfortunately, 3-jaw pullers don't work well on the Chrysler Harmonic balancers. My father and I have both destroyed 3-jaw pullers doing it and not made any progress. In fact, he thought it was that somebody had put red Loctite on there, and he even called the company that makes Loctite, and they told him, well, you're pretty much screwed if it is. But went and rented this from O'Reilly's, and there was no Loctite on that harmonic balancer. It came right off. So yeah, these are important to have when you're doing a job like this. Now, one of these things, these kits only come with 2 rods, and the longest rod that they have isn't quite long enough. It recesses into this bolt. There's a hole in the end here, and unfortunately, when it's assembled like that, the rod is not quite long enough to reach the end. So somebody stuck a piece of bolt in here that fits down in here, like so, and that takes up the last couple of, or the last 3/4 or 3/8 of an inch to half an inch that is required to pull the harmonic balancer completely off of the crankshaft. Normally I would just take a bolt that fits in there and just screw it on the head, but that doesn't allow you to slip the rod into the guide bolt, so it's a little less safe, I guess. It could slip off. But anyway, if you're ever doing one of these and you find that problem, just remember, grab a small bolt, one that fits down in the hole of the guide bolt, and that'll give you that last little bit that you need. But I'm going to get to work. Some things before I pull it out apart. This wire here, going to the ground on the battery, is the wire that I spliced onto the pigtail for the neutral safety switch. You can just see it down there. That red thing is a wire splice, a crimp-on wire splice that I use to bypass the neutral safety switch. Again, you really shouldn't do that. That allows the car to be cranked in any gear and possibly started, which means it can have a runaway. But I'm the only one with the keys to this car right now, so I'm not too worried about it. And I'm replacing it today anyway, so whatever. As far as the timing belt goes, you do need to take this engine mount off. So you're going to need to put a jack underneath. If I recall correctly, you don't need to unbolt the front engine mount. which is down there. Don't know how well that's going to show up. There we go, right there. You shouldn't have to take the through bolt out on that. But you're going to need to put a block of wood and a jack underneath the engine and move it up and down. But you do have to take the power steering belt off and the power steering pump off of the mount it's got because of this bracket that comes around the front, the tensioning bracket assembly. You're going to have to get that out of the way. You're also going to have to take the alternator loose, take the belt off of it, but you do not have to remove the alternator. Because this timing cover, this piece right here, is actually behind both the power steering pump bracket and this engine mount. So it can be a bit of a headache sometimes, but you can get it off without having to take too much of the car apart. I did take this wheel off to get ready for it. And yes, those are really cheap slotted rotors. They were cheaper than the factory rotors at the time I bought them, so that's just what I went with. But yeah, that's the crankshaft harmonic balancer that you're going to have to remove. As you can see, the rubber in mine is kind of starting to fail. But it hasn't completely gone yet, so I'm not too worried about it. Just got to make sure that if anything starts going wrong, that I get that swapped. But anyway, I'm going to get back to it. Okay. Got the power steering pump out of the way. And as far as this bracket goes, it can be kind of a pain in the butt to get out sometimes, but I've done it enough that I know the tricks. For this bolt here, when it's actually sitting in the hole down there, you jack the engine up a little bit. Again, you don't have to take the front engine mount loose. Just make sure that you're not, crushing any of your reservoirs there. Jack it up a little bit, pull the bolt out. For the bottom bolt, you just let the engine down and pull it out, but be very careful about crushing these, because when you're going down, the engine's tilting backwards. You can crush those. And then that third bolt, you just leave it in, back it out until it's loose, then pull it out with the bracket, and that's how you get that out. The crankshaft bolt, which is a 3/4, excuse me, sitting right there. I'm not 100%, I can't remember if it was this car or any others, but I know that you're not supposed to take a crankshaft bolt out with an impact. I did anyway, but don't do that, and certainly don't put it in with one. But, that's if you absolutely want to follow the instructions in the book. As far as the puller goes, I went straight for the long rod, but I did not put the little piece of bolt inserted into there yet. But it fits on here, on these flat spots. If you reach behind here, you can actually feel cups in the center of the harmonic balancer where those fit in, and then the rod is slipped into this bolt, and then this bolt is just threaded in to the hole, or the puller device, and it's got a hex shape here, so you can put a wrench on it to keep the crankshaft from turning as you turn this bolt in to pull the balancer away. So just wanted to show you guys that. Back to work. Seems I was wise to get the tensioner pulley with the timing belts. Also, some of the kits will come with the camshaft and crankshaft front main seals. If you can afford them, I say get them with the kit, because you really don't want to have to pull all of this apart again just to change those damn seals, not after you've done this. And if you do end up having to change those seals, it's probably because of an oil leak, in which case you have to replace your timing belt again because it'll be soaked with oil and compromised. But as far as this idler pulley goes, I can't really do it like that. Set up my glove. The pulley's not touching the glove at all. That's just how it stops, because the bearings are so chopped in them. You can actually feel it. It does move smoothly. There's no notching, but you can feel it kind of. It feels like there's flat spots on the bearings as they rotate, which means it's about to fail. So, and the new bearing over here spins without making any noise at all, which is how it's supposed to be. Now, this bolt that holds that tensioner on, the pivot that it pivots on, You're going to want to put some anti-seize on this because the tensioner can catch on this, especially if there's a bunch of crap on there, and that can end up a really bad day. Just make sure you don't put enough on there to get on the timing belt, on this smooth part of the shaft anyway. On this threaded part, probably going to want to put some Loctite on there, because if that happens to back out while you're going down the road, well, you're going to need a new engine, or at least a new cylinder head. Yeah. That is kind of nasty. This would have failed soon enough. I'd actually thought I'd heard some noise coming from the engine on that side earlier today when I went to get the Harmonic balancer puller. So that might have been it. I don't know, but I'll find out. And as far as this seal here goes, don't worry about it too much unless you live on a gravel road. No rocks and stuff are going to get in there, and it's almost impossible to get this thing back into place perfectly. But yeah, now I have to take the inner timing cover off, or at least loose, so that I can get to all the bolts that hold the water pump in. Oh, sorry. There we go. Yeah, the water pump is back here. This pulley goes to it, and this is the inner timing cover. It stops right about here as far as going down, and then the top is not separate. It does go behind the camshaft pulley, which is a 15mm bolt, but I would not recommend taking that off. I would actually recommend avoiding that at all costs if you can, because that's a headache you don't want to deal with. And lastly, always make sure to find out what is the recommended life from the manufacturer for your timing belt. I made the mistake of trying to squeeze a couple of thousand extra miles out of a timing belt. It was only rated for 90,000, and I got to 110,000 before it finally snapped on me. Don't go past the life expectancy of a cheap belt, because it will fail. Anyway, back to work. I almost had a panic moment. I got a little too aggressive with this tensioner pulley pivot and snapped the bolt off. And I don't know if you can tell, but those two bolts next to it kind of explain why I'm not panicking anymore. It bolts on. The whole unit bolts on to the engine like this. So, thankfully, I still have the old engine that came out of this car. So I'm just going to swap this tensioner pulley. I'd actually done a timing belt probably less than 60,000 miles before the engine finally lost compression. And yeah, so I'm going to swap the pulley on this one for the new one, even though this is probably still good. It's not even notchy or anything. Doesn't have any play in it. But I'm going to swap it. I'm not going to over torque the tensioner this time. And then I got to worry about the timing cover, because on the Neons, that rear timing cover that covers the water pump goes behind the camshaft pulley. And unfortunately, I don't feel like taking it off, because I don't want to line up the timing marks again. Now, this timing cover was broken, so I got lucky. But I'm not going to be so lucky on the other one. It's not broken like that. At least I hope it's not. So I'm going to have to take out the 2 bolts on the water pump holding it on, and the 2 bolts behind the camshaft pulley. Don't know how those are going to show up on camera. And I don't know how loud I was. Sorry about that. But anyway, I get to play with that. But then the real headache comes when I have to compress the tensioner. This is hydraulic. I'm assuming with a spring in it, but could just be straight hydraulic. But these things are notoriously hard to compress, and then you have to find a drill bit or something that'll fit in those holes when they line up, and that's how you put it in there, and then you get it about halfway up and down and pull the drill bit out, and the hydraulic tensioner pops out and tensions the timing belt, and it can be a pain in the ass. Thankfully, I have never seen one of these fail. I've heard that if you compress them too quickly, since they're hydraulic, you can destroy them, but I've never done it myself, so I guess we'll see, you know. Yet again, we have a slightly worn out bearings. Don't know if you can hear that, but It's definitely got some worn bearings in it, flat spots on the bearings and such, whereas the new one makes no noise at all. And as you can see, this uses a captive style gasket, so you do not need silicone. Do not use silicone on this. If you use silicone on it, you're just wasting your time. If you need silicone on it, you didn't install it right, do it again. No silicone. Alright, I was lucky in that the rear timing cover was already broken on this. I guess somebody's had their front feet in it before me. But as far as getting the timing belt back on and lining it up, I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera, but there is a very tiny little notch right there in the camshaft pulley. It lines up with this notch here and the timing cover. That's top dead center. As far as the crankshaft, got this really teeny tiny little arrow there that points up at the bigger arrow there. And when you're tensioning this, remember that the tensioner is what moves, nothing else. So have the timing belt tight across the bottom of the crankshaft pulley, across the water pump, and across the top of the camshaft pulley. Make sure that it stays tight when you have the tensioner in place and pull the pin out, because this tensioner here, let's see if I can get that, this tensioner here will snap over and tension the belt. And you don't want it to turn the crankshaft or the camshaft when it's tensioning, which it will do if you don't have it tight across the water pump, the crankshaft, and the camshaft pulleys. So now I get to fight with this stupid tensioner and see if I can get it to compress. This is how I got it compressed. This drill bit is a 5/64. That's the only thing that fit through the holes and the shaft there. The shaft hole is smaller than the outer holes. But yeah, don't do this. Don't ever do this. You're putting a lot of stress on this pin. You can damage the tensioner, and you can damage yourself, because this already did pop off at me, and it's got quite a bit of force behind it. I don't know how the internals of these are set up, and I'm not about to cut one open to find out. But when you tension these down, the tension builds very, very quickly to the point where it's incredibly difficult to turn. But if you stop and let it bleed for a minute, the tension ebbs. It comes down. And I believe that's the hydraulics in it moving past the inner valve body, similar to a shock. And you can turn it again. But as soon as you release the tension, it flies up. So, yeah. Just be careful. With these tensioner bolts, long one goes on bottom. Or no, wait. Long one goes on top. Yeah. Because the long one goes in that upper hole, which is really deep, and the short one goes into that hole, which is threaded right away. So yeah, long one on top, short one on bottom. You put the tensioner in, make sure the belt, put the tensioner in, make sure the belt is where you want it, and then you pull the drill bit out with a pair of pliers, and there you go. That's how you tension the timing belt on a Neon. And make sure that you've got the timing marks lined up before you pull that pin, or that drill bit, otherwise you could be having one hell of a headache. Okay, once you got the timing belt on, and the tensioner set, you may want to pry up on the bottom of the tensioner between that and the housing a little bit, the timing cover housing, shape, casting, whatever it is, before you tighten those bolts down, to give it a little bit of tension before you pull the pin, so that it can have a little bit more throw to push on that tensioner. Your timing belt, your timing marks might move a little bit. It did on my crankshaft on this one. Don't panic when that happens. Rotate the engine around a couple of times, check your timing marks again. If they're about the same or dead on, you're good. If you're a cog or two out, pull it off, start again. But this can be the hardest part of doing the camshaft, other than getting the damn harmonic balancer off, or doing the timing belt, sorry, not the camshaft, is getting those marks lined up. You got to play the same game when you're doing the cylinder head, when you replace the cylinder head on these. So I'm fairly used to it, but take your time, do it right, before you button everything up, and you shouldn't have any issues. As far as the water pump, like I said, no silicone. But when you put it on there, you kind of have to fight with the gasket a little bit. You don't really have to worry about torquing it down too much. If you want to do the torque specs, that's fine. Otherwise, just kind of snug the bolts down. Make sure that the gasket is good and compressed between the water pump housing and the backing plate, whatever the hell it is. I'm not sure if it's a casting or what, but make sure that gasket is good and compressed. It doesn't have to be a whole hell of a lot. I think the torque for these is 14 foot-pounds at most, because they're very small bolts. They're 3/8 bolts. Just take your time, be gentle. You can check for leaks by dumping water in the engine. Of course, you got to close the bung on the radiator. And make sure you got to kind of bled the air out of it a little bit. But if you don't have any drips coming from around the water pump, you're golden. You can go ahead and start assembly again and get to where I am and then play with the timing belt. Alright, it's back together, it's running. Didn't have to readjust the timing belt, thankfully. Got it right the first time. I'm bleeding the cooling system now. This dripping here is from when I was pouring the water in, I hope. I can't tell. I believe it is. I'll find out, won't I? Anyway, not going to do the neutral safety switch. My workaround is working for right now, and I'm pretty tore up after doing this. Bending at funny ankles and trying to torque down bolts can be a bit of a pain in the ass, but it was the water pump and tensioner pulley that were making the funny noises earlier today, because they are no longer there. I think the harmonic balancer might be a little bit wore out. I think the rubber might be moving or something, I don't know. But when you go to put the harmonic balancer back on, when you get it on the shaft, it might not want to tension. So you might have to hammer it a little bit to get the bolt to start threading into the crankshaft. You want to make sure that the crankshaft bolt has a good couple of threads before you start turning on it, or you'll strip it. The way I do it is when I hit it, I hit the outside of that hole that the crankshaft bolt goes through. There's a raised part. If you hit on that moving out towards the outside of the balancer, it'll mushroom out, but it won't keep you from putting the bolt in. Whereas if you just hit it flat, good luck getting the bolt in. You'll have to drill out that center hole, and that can be a pain in the ass. As far as moving the engine up and down, you might want to get a ratchet strap and hook it to the either the old airbox attachment point back here. I'm guessing you'd be working on a car that wasn't modified, so you'd have to take the airbox out to do it. But this old airbox mount, or if you got a 95, the coil pack mount works just fine. But attach it there, wrap it around the front, and attach it to one of the holes in the front radiator or front engine mount down there across the bumper. Ratchet it tight, and that'll pull the engine forward away from the coolant reservoir tank, so you don't have to worry about it breaking, and you can get to the alternator tensioner, which can be a bit of a pain in the ass if you don't do it right. But anyway, I got this thing running, and that tool cost me 80 some odd bucks to rent, so I'm going to make sure I get that back today so I can get my money back. I guess that'll be it. Thanks for watching.